I've always found it best not to look into the past.
With so many movies being made based on comics from DC and Marvel, these studios are always in need of actors to star in their films. The popularity of these brands has routinely allowed studios to attract major stars to these movies or turn lesser-known actors into stars. The MCU turned Robert Downey Jr. into one of the biggest celebrities in the world, while Joaquin Phoenix won an Oscar for playing the Crown Prince of Crime in Joker. But there are also multiple cases of actors playing lead or supporting roles in both franchises. We wanted to know who they were. These are the Marvel actors who will appear in the upcoming DC films. But before we get into the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel with notifications on so you don't miss any of the new videos we post. Willem Dafoe. Willem Dafoe played a key part in Sony's original Spider-Man franchise as he debuted as Norman Osborn, aka Green Goblin, in the 2002 Sam Raimi film. Despite the character dying, Dafoe reprised his role as the Green Goblin for both of the sequels. He recently joined the DCEU to play Vulko and Aquaman, and his role in Justice League will be restored in the Snyder Cut. Danny Huston. Danny Huston is another comic book movie villain veteran for both brands. He got his start playing the Striker in X-Men Origins Wolverine in 2009, where he was the younger version of the character Brian Cox previously played. Huston then joined the cast of Wonder Woman to play the German General Ludendorff. DJIMON HOUNSOU. DJIMON HOUNSOU has appeared in several different DC and Marvel movies. His first appearance with DC came when he played Midnight in Constantine. HOUNSOU then moved to the MCU to play Korath in Guardians of the Galaxy. He later returned to DC to voice King Riku in Aquaman, then played Korath again in Captain Marvel, and most recently jumped back to DC to play the Wizard in Shazam. Halle Berry. Halle Berry was a prominent star of the superhero movies in the early 2000s. She started off playing Aurora Monroe, aka Storm, in X-Men and X2 X-Men United. Before finishing the trilogy, Berry jumped to DC to play Patience Phillips in a Catwoman solo movie. Berry then returned to the X-Men franchise for X-Men The Last Stand and came back almost a decade later to play Storm again in X-Men Days of Future Past. Hugo Weaving. Hugo Weaving began his time with comic book movies thanks to the movie adaptation of V for Vendetta. The comic book the movie is based on wasn't a DC comic when it was created, but it was published as a limited series by DC later on. Weaving played V in the 2006 movie. He later played Johann Schmidt, aka Red Skull, in Captain America: The First Avenger. IDRIS ELBA. IDRIS ELBA is no stranger to comic book movies, as he's tackled multiple roles for DC and Marvel. His first role came as Rogue in The Losers in 2010 before making his MCU debut as Heimdall in 2011's Thor. Elba then appeared in a non-MCU Marvel movie as Morrow in Ghost Rider: Spirit of Vengeance, but then returned as Heimdall in both Thor sequels and Avengers: Infinity War, where his character died. He's now attached to star as Bloodsport in DC's The Suicide Squad. James Marsden. James Marsden joins his first superhero movie in 2000 as he played Scott Summers, aka Cyclops, in X-Men. He returned to play the role in the two sequels before moving to DC temporarily. Marsden then played Perry White's son Richard in Superman Returns. He later reprised his role as Cyclops in X-Men Days of Future Past. J.K. Simmons. J.K. Simmons began his time in superhero movies in 2002 with Spider-Man. He played J. Jonah Jameson throughout Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy, which ended in 2007. Several years later, Simmons moved to DC to play Commissioner Jim Gordon in Justice League. However, he has since played Jameson again thanks to a cameo at the end of Spider-Man: Far From Home. Joe Manganiello. Joe Manganiello entered the superhero movie world with Spider-Man 2. He played bully Flash Thompson in the first film, didn't return for the sequel, but was back for Spider-Man 3. More recently, Manganiello came to DC to play Slade Wilson, aka Deathstroke, in Justice League. Josh Brolin. Josh Brolin has frequently appeared in comic book movies. His first role with DC was the lead of Jonah Hex in 2010, but that was it for Brolin before moving to Marvel. He played Thanos in the MCU in Guardians of the Galaxy, Avengers: Infinity War, and Avengers: Endgame. During this time, though, Brolin also played Cable in 2018's Deadpool 2. Laurence Fishburne. Laurence Fishburne is another actor who has appeared in a variety of comic book movies. His first credit comes from his voice, as he provided the voice of Silver Surfer in Fantastic Four: Rise of the Silver Surfer. Fishburne then joined DC to play Daily Planet's Perry White. He made his DCEU debut in Man of Steel, and then returned for Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. Fishburne most recently joined the MCU to play Bill Foster in the Ant-Man and the Wasp. Michael Clarke Duncan. Michael Clarke Duncan joined his first superhero movie in 2003. He played Wilson Fisk, aka Kingpin, in Daredevil. Several years later, Duncan moved from Marvel to join DC, even though he wasn't physically on screen. He provided the voice for Kilowog, the protector of 674 in Green Lantern. Michael Fassbender. Michael Fassbender has recently been one of the leads of a Marvel franchise, but he got his start with DC. He originally played Burke in 2010's Jonah Hex. The following year, Fassbender made the jump to Marvel to play Eric Lensher, aka Magneto. His debut came in X-Men First Class. Fassbender returned to play Magneto in 3 more X-Men sequels. Michael Keaton. Michael Keaton is one of the original stars of comic book movies. He made his DC debut as Bruce Wayne, aka Batman, in 1989's Batman. Keaton reprised his role as the Dark Knight a few years later for Batman Returns. After staying away from comic book movies for decades, Keaton joined the MCU to play Adrian Toomes, aka Vulture, in Spider-Man: Homecoming. He's scheduled to reprise that role in Morbius, but will also play Batman again in The Flash. Michelle Pfeiffer. Speaking of Batman Returns, this is where Michelle Pfeiffer made her debut in a comic book movie. She played Selina Kyle, aka Catwoman, in the movie. Several years later, Pfeiffer joined the MCU to play Janet Van Dyne, the original Wasp. She made her debut in Ant-Man and the Wasp and is expected to return for future MCU movies. Natalie Portman. Natalie Portman also got her start in the comic book movie genre with DC, as she played Evie in V for Vendetta. A few years later, Portman made the transition to MCU to play Jane Foster. She made her debut in Thor and returned for Thor: The Dark World. Portman is scheduled to return as Jane and become Mighty Thor in Thor: Love and Thunder. Randall Park. Randall Park recently double-dipped in the superhero movie genre. He played Agent Jimmy Woo in Ant-Man and the Wasp in 2018, but then appeared in Aquaman the same year. Park played Dr. Stephen Shin in the DCEU movie. Park is expected to reprise both of these roles in the future, but so far only an appearance as Woo in WandaVision is confirmed. Ryan Reynolds. Ryan Reynolds is no stranger to comic book movie roles. His first movie role was as Hannibal King in Blade Trinity, but then played Wade Wilson in X-Men Origins Wolverine. Reynolds then moved to DC to play Hal Jordan in Green Lantern. However, Reynolds remained interested in playing Deadpool and finally got the chance to play a proper version of the Merc with a Mouth in Deadpool and Deadpool 2. Taika Waititi. Taika Waititi is best known as the director of Thor: Ragnarok, but he's also had roles in both Marvel and DC movies. He also had a role in Green Lantern where he played Hal's best friend Tom Kalmaku. Waititi then gave himself a role in the MCU when he directed Thor: Ragnarok. He played Korg in the movie and has since returned in Avengers Endgame. Terence Stamp. Terence Stamp has also appeared in DC and Marvel movies. His first appearance came in Superman, where he played the villainous General Zod. Stamp was also seen as Zod a few years later in Superman 2. 25 years later, Stamp made an appearance in the Marvel movie as he played Stick in Elektra. Tilda Swinton. Tilda Swinton originally joined DC instead of Marvel. She played Gabriel in Keanu Reeves' Constantine in 2005, but has moved to the MCU more recently. Swinton joined the cast of Doctor Strange to play the Ancient One, which was a controversial choice at the time. She later returned in Avengers Endgame thanks to time travel after her character died in Doctor Strange. Tom Hardy. Tom Hardy has already played 2 major Marvel and DC characters. His first outing is when he teamed with Christopher Nolan for The Dark Knight Rises to play Bane. Hardy has since joined Marvel and helped Sony launch their own villain universe with Venom. He is set to return as Eddie Brock in Venom: Let There Be Carnage. Tommy Lee Jones. Tommy Lee Jones has taken parts in both DC and Marvel movies too. His first comic book movie was as Harvey Dent, aka Two-Face, in Batman Forever. Jones joined the MCU several decades later to play Colonel Phillips in Captain America: The First Avenger. Zachary Levi. Zachary Levi has also appeared in films based on DC and Marvel comics. He was originally part of the MCU as he was cast as Fandral in Thor: The Dark World. Levi replaced Josh Dallas for the sequel and returned briefly in Thor: Ragnarok. He has returned most recently and played the lead role in Shazam and will return to star in Shazam: Fury of the Gods. Zoe Saldana. Zoe Saldana spent the last several years in the MCU, but she was in a DC movie before that. Saldana played Aisha in The Losers 4 years before she joined the MCU to play Gamora. Saldana made her MCU debut in Guardians of the Galaxy and reprised the role in the sequel and the last 2 Avengers films. She's now slated to return for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 as Gamora from a different universe. And that concludes our list. What are your impressions? Feel free to leave a comment. Come back for our next video, and until then, stay safe.